The Dark Secrets of Medieval Witch Trials Introduction. In medieval Europe, between the 1300s and 1700s, thousands of people were accused of witchcraft, put on trial, and often executed. These events, known as the witch trials, were a dark chapter in history, fueled by fear, superstition, and power struggles. The trials weren't just about magic. They revealed deep secrets about society, religion, and human nature. This history explains how the witch trials began, who was targeted, how they were carried out, and why they finally ended, all in simple words. The beginnings of witch hysteria, life in medieval Europe, was tough. Diseases like the Black Death killed millions, crops failed, and wars left villages in ruins. People didn't understand why these disasters happened, so they turned to religion for answers. The Catholic Church, which had huge influence, taught that the devil was behind all evil. By the 1400s, this idea grew into a belief that some people, called witches, worked with the devil to cause harm. The Church played a big role in spreading this fear. In 1486, two German monks wrote a book called Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. It claimed witches were real, flew on broomsticks, cast spells, and hurt people with magic. The book became very popular and convinced many that witches were everywhere. It wasn't just superstition. Rulers and religious leaders used this fear to control people and silence those who challenged them. Who were the accused? Most people accused of witchcraft were women, making up about 80% of the victims. Why women? In medieval times, men held most of the power, and women were seen as weaker and more likely to be tempted by the devil. The Malleus Maleficarum even said women were naturally sinful, which made them easy targets. The accused were often people who didn't fit in. They could be healers or midwives. Women who used herbs or helped with childbirth were sometimes called witches if something went wrong, like a baby dying. Widows or single women, women living alone, especially if they owned land, were suspicious because they didn't follow society's rules. The poor or elderly. People with no one to protect them were easy to accuse. Anyone different. A strange habit, a birthmark, or an argument with a neighbor could lead to an accusation. Men were accused, too, but less often. They were usually connected to an accused woman, like a husband or son, or were seen as threats to the church or local leaders. How the trials worked. Witch trials were not random. They followed a cruel, organized process. Here's how they typically unfolded. The accusation, an accusation could start with something small, like a cow getting sick or a child falling ill. Neighbors might blame someone they didn't like, saying they used magic to cause the problem. Sometimes, personal grudges or jealousy led to accusations. For example, if someone wanted a widow's land, accusing her of witchcraft was an easy way to get rid of her. The investigation, once accused, the person was arrested and questioned. Investigators, often church officials or local judges, asked leading questions like, "When did you meet the devil?" They assumed the accused was guilty. If the person didn't confess, they faced worse treatment. Torture was common to force confessions. Methods were brutal. The rack, stretching a person's body until their joints broke. The swimming test, tying someone up and throwing them into water. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent, but often drowned. Thumbscrews, crushing fingers to cause pain. Many confessed just to stop the torture, even if they weren't guilty. These confessions were used as proof in court. The trials were unfair. There was little real evidence, just rumors, dreams, or spectral evidence, claims that the witch's spirit appeared to someone. The accused had no lawyers, and judges often believed they were guilty from the start. In some places, like Germany, Entire towns were swept up in mass trials, with dozens accused at once. The punishment, if found guilty, most faced death. Burning at the stake was the most famous punishment, but hanging was more common in places, like England. Some were beheaded or drowned. Before execution, the accused were often paraded through town, mocked and humiliated. In rare cases, they were exiled or imprisoned, but this was uncommon. The human toll the witch trials caused immense suffering. Historians estimate that 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft in Europe. Many more were tortured or lost everything they had. Families were destroyed, and communities lived in fear, afraid of being accused next. Some examples show the scale of the tragedy. Würzburg, Germany, 1626 to 1631, hundreds, including children, and priests were burned in one of the worst witch hunts. North Berwick, Scotland, 1590–1592. Dozens were executed after King James VI became obsessed with stopping witches. Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. Though later than the medieval period, this American trial showed the same fear, with 20 people executed. One heartbreaking story is that of Agnes Sampson, a Scottish midwife. She was tortured, forced to confess to impossible crimes, and executed. Her only crime was helping people with herbs. The hidden motives. The trials weren't just about fear of magic. They hid darker reasons, power and fear. The church and rulers used witch trials to control people. By calling witches enemies of God, they scared people into obeying. The trials also silenced anyone who questioned authority, like rebels or freethinkers. Greed accusing someone of witchcraft could be profitable. When a person was convicted, their land and belongings were often taken by the church or local officials. This made it easy to target wealthy people or settle personal scores. Hatred of women. The trials targeted women because society saw them as weaker and more sinful. Strong or independent women, like widows or healers, were especially at risk. The Malleus Maleficarum fueled this hatred, painting women as dangerous. Ignorance. People didn't understand illnesses like epilepsy or mental health problems. They thought these were signs of witchcraft. Healers who tried to help were often accused of causing the problems they were trying to fix. Mass panic. Once an accusation was made, it could spread like wildfire. Confessing witches were forced to name others, creating a chain reaction. In some towns, fear turned neighbors into enemies, and entire communities collapsed. Why the trials ended by the late 1600s? The witch trials began to slow down. Several reasons explain why. The Enlightenment. New ideas about science and reason made people question old superstitions. They started to see that torture and flimsy evidence weren't fair. Better courts. Some countries, like England, passed laws making it harder to convict someone of witchcraft. Judges began demanding real proof. Voices of reason. People like Friedrich Spee, a German priest, spoke out against the trials, saying they were unjust. Their writings changed minds. By the 1700s, large-scale witch hunts were rare, though small. Cases continued in some places. The lasting impact. The witch trials left a deep mark on history. They showed how fear and ignorance can lead to terrible injustice. Today, we use the term witch hunt to describe unfair attacks on innocent people, like during political scandals or social media pile-ons. The trials also inspired stories, books, and movies. From Macbeth to modern films, witches remain a symbol of mystery and fear. But these stories often forget the real pain of the victims. Ordinary people who suffered because they were different. Conclusion. The medieval witch trials were a tragic mix of fear, greed, and ignorance. They destroyed lives, tore apart communities, and revealed the dangers of unchecked power. By learning about this dark history, we can understand the importance of fairness, reason, and compassion. The victims of the witch trials deserve to be remembered, not as witches, but as people who faced a terrible injustice in a fearful world.